afternoon again. Uh, Today's topic are five fundamentals of fundraising. Um, I feel the first caveat that I'd like to put out there is that I'm not a fundraiser, and this is not a seminar about a magic bullet that will raise funds. However, we are going to describe what I think are the five building blocks of any good fundraising strategy. And let's get started here. Push the right buttons. Right? Always exciting. Certainly glad that you're taking some time out from this cold day to listen to what we have to say. As I said, we're not fundraisers. Um, Executive Service Corps Houston's role is basically to communicate and relate successful business practices from the for-profit world to the nonprofit situation. And what I'm hoping you'll do with this is apply some of these principles and ask some questions if you need to better understand them and plug them into your nonprofit situation. So with that, let's see if we can. Hey, now it's working. Um, I've been giving seminars on this topic since 2019. I looked it up. And when I rewrote it for this presentation, I stepped back and tried to simplify what we were trying to say. And as I said, we've built it into obviously five elements of fundraising, if you will, five chapters of a book. Um, so we'll see what we can do to put together a very strategically sound fundraising strategy. First one I like to start with is character from Ted Lasso, Donnie Rojas, and he's his main line in that TV show is "Football is life." Well, to me, as far as nonprofit is concerned, fundraising is life. Um, the first fundamental is it is life and it's a full-time proposition. We'll talk some more about each of these as we go through the presentation. But uh, my point is that uh, you've got to devote the time and energy to fundraising. You probably came into the nonprofit with a lot of enthusiasm for the objective of fulfilling some needs in society and in the community. But without money to make it happen, uh, it isn't going to happen. So we'll talk some more about that in just a minute. Uh, to give you the table of contents of the presentation, basically, to compete, you have to be unique. You have to stand out. And first, maybe the shock is that you have to compete for funds, just like a for-profit operation. The third fundamental in my eyes is caught in the phrase aim to retain. And that is to hang on to the hard-won donors that you have and money supplies that you have. And you've got to put an effort into that. So it isn't just getting the donation, it's holding on to the donor. Fourth principle is, to me, fundamental is consistency. And consistency translates to quality. And that takes a process. And we're going to describe a three-part process: prospecting, persuading, and preserving, that is consistent with the three fundamentals ahead of it. And then lastly, metrics matter. The language of fundraising is numbers. The people who are your customers in terms of your donors speed read a lot of information before they get to you, and they they don't sense as much the emotion as they do the numerical gains that you've made. And we'll talk some more about that too. I've used this model probably too much, but this is the basic flow plan of a for-profit business. And if you follow it, it'll explain the extra burden that nonprofits carry as we convert a for-profit. So we look at profit and nonprofit businesses very similar. On the left-hand side, you've got resources and a need. Resources could be materials, people, uh, machinery, whatever. And you put it in that red box, the process, and your unique process adds value and assembles all that. So if you're in the house building process, you take lumber and skills and tools and put them together and make a house. And that's a value add. It takes all those loose parts and makes them something. That output results in the green box, and that's observed by four groups out there. The consumer of the output, maybe the objective of your nonprofit, the public in general, the people, the associates you work with in the nonprofit, and future stakeholders, people who have hopefully will someday become your donors. Now, in the for-profit world, each of these groups has some expectations of your output and they judge you against them. Unfortunately, they don't spell these expectations out in black and white often. They simply give you some feedback, positive or negative. And in the for profit world, uh, that builds a set of requirements. Same in the nonprofit world. Also, in the for profit world, one of the favorite forms of feedback that you get is money, represented by the dollar sign here. So, right off the bat, now we see a difference shaping up where this is the for profit business model is simplified. Um, One of the key things that for profits really struggle to achieve is repeat business, to hang on to the customers they have, brand loyalty, come back again, please. And that is the basis of where I spent a lot of my career time, and that is in customer service. Now, in the nonprofit world, it's rare that they ask for money from the consumer of the output of a nonprofit. And this is something that hit me after I joined ESH in working with nonprofits that my customer service experience didn't apply to the pet owners, homeless, whomever the objective was, the consumer of the output of the particular nonprofit. So, in a nonprofit case, the money comes in the side door, contributions. Normally, the money comes from the customer. Well, in this case, the customer shifts and has got a new name, donors. And those donors require well, we want to achieve their repeat business. So the repeat business target shifts from the consumer. In fact, one of the objectives of a nonprofit might be that there be no repeat customers, that they solve the problem. So to encourage repeat donations, you've got to put something in that's the equivalent of customer service in uh, the for-profit case, and I've labeled it donor care. And this means that the folks in the nonprofit in that process box have a kind of have a dual loyalty. They have to deliver the output and satisfy the consumer of their output, but they also have to deliver for the contributors that are supporting the business. And that's pretty much the focus of the end consumer of a lot of time in fundraising.
Yeah, what happened? Let me
So fundamental number one,
Now it's connected.
fundraising is essential for a nonprofit to exist. In fact, I've stated it this way, that a nonprofit's business is to transform other people's money or assets into community involvement. Somebody's not muted. You check your mute, please. Thank you. It's actually equal to the mission of delivering your your mission of delivering nonprofit benefits is equaled by the requirement to transform money into continuing your operation. No money, no service to the community. So it's vital. Let me just, whoops. Don't touch the mouse, George. I apologize. Technical problem. I touched the mouse and it backed up the slides. Okay, so here's my point. Uh, the reality is that financial stability is essential to allow your NP, your nonprofit mission to be accomplished. And the donors also need constant attention to ensure the flow of and a secure financial stability. Assuring financial support typically requires investing 30 to 40% of a nonprofit's overall effort to be effective. Executive directors spend sometimes 50% of their time networking, stewarding, in effect, supporting the fundraising effort, maintaining the connections with the community that supports them. Board members, uniquely, need to leverage the contacts that they have in the community to support the fundraising effort. Fundraising capacity actually can be a qualification to be on the board on a board position. Uh, I'll digress just for a second here and suggest that perhaps, by the way, copies of this presentation are available through Levy when we're done. We'll send you a PDF file of these slides. But here's a list of what board members can do to support the fundraising effort. Number one is demonstrate personal financial leadership, actually give some money and include the organization in their estate plan. You might even consider a bylaw requirement that board members give an appropriate amount of money to stay on the board. It isn't. They can also help grow the database with their contacts, and I'll skip through some of this, but they can promote the brand by being a good ambassador out in the community, making sure that your name is known, and they can participate in the fundraising strategic development once they understand what the challenge is. In fact, this can be a great way to involve them in the first few points. And they can assist in writing grant applications, and they, of course, participate in fundraisers that the nonprofit may have. Second fundamental, to compete, you have to be unique. Uh, in seeking financial support, the key challenge is to be chosen. And you may not think that you joined a nonprofit to be in competition, but you very much are. Uh, the question I raise here is, all the causes that are out there are important, but are you a part of the important many, or are you one of the critical few chosen? And this is the challenge to compete. Let's take a quick look at where funds come from. In this slide, the green letters, words, are individuals. We group them into two groups. Individuals you find um, by proactive campaigning. As I said, board members, there are major donors out there, bequests, direct donations, events and campaigns fall into this category. Then there's individuals who find you. Um, you have to have the ability to react for walk-ins, if you will. People who contact you via your website, referrals, marketing referrals, donor-directed funds. So those are individuals. Now, below the dashed line are organizations. Um, corporations and foundations. Corporations are from the for-profit world. They can find an alliance with your nonprofit if it matches their objectives, creates good community, goodwill. Um, so those fall into categories like sponsorship, where the category where they write you a check, very straightforward, wish you well. There's partnership, where they co-promote your cause, uh, sales tie-ins, and so forth. Um, Simplest one I can think of is the annual PTA night at the pizzeria or something like that, where they share um, their name with your cause. And then there are in-kind donations, which is where a corporation sheds some material or purchases the material, like Home Depot giving out lumber, um, or some other materials, or surplus desks and chairs and things like that. Foundations, and there are all kinds of foundations, private, family, community, corporate, government, and they direct and analyze the different proposals, and they administer the money that people put into the foundation. So are a nonprofit themselves, and they hand out the money basically through grants for projects. And the heads up there is you can't necessarily just knock on the door. You may require an invitation. And then the third category, which we're not going to talk a lot about today, would be entrepreneurial earned income, where your nonprofit business acts as a for-profit business or has investment income. And the IRS will limit that to 15 to 30% of your total revenue to preserve your nonprofit status. So they're heads up on that one. But the funding strategy has to concern a mix of all of these things. And now let's just take a quick look at some data. Um, Here's who gives money. This is updated through 2023, but it's been fairly constant. And if you look at this, the yellow is corporations, which you might find surprisingly small. The total number, however, is $557 billion of donations. And this excludes money going to hospitals and higher education, like colleges. So corporations give 7%, foundations administer about 19% of total donations, and bequests through wills that people put in their estate planning contributes another 8%. But individuals uh, contribute 67% of that $557 billion. So the obvious conclusion is, of the two categories in the previous table, 75% are going to be individual choices. So you're going to be having to deal, likely, I should say, you're likely to have to deal with individual choices. Now, in my limited experience, many nonprofits starting up, and that's basically the perspective that I have, uh, think that they're going to write a grant that's going to fund all of their operations or a large part of their operations. And I put this slide in there deliberately to say that that's not likely the case unless you have connections with some very powerful uh, and wealthy friends. You're going to likely to be dealing with individuals. Um, Now, when they decide and they look out, if you will, on this public of the excuse me the nonprofit community, uh, where does this money go? Well, 27% of it goes to religious entities, uh, and this is who you're competing against. Educational opportunities, human services captures a healthy percent. Foundations themselves take in money. Health services, public and society, international. You go around the pinwheel there. Animal environment, ASPA, ASPCA, and arts and culture. So this is your competition when you present yourself in front and asking, this is where they're thinking their money might go. And if their money is limited, it depends, of course, on their objective, uh, in terms of giving donations, This is what you're up against. And as a footnote to this, I came across the statistic, and I don't know if I haven't had a chance to check it out, but in the Houston area alone, there are some 13,000 nonprofits of one shade or another. So you're adding to a very diverse pot. Um, so fundamental number two, to compete, be unique. Um, a marketing technique that's been around a long time. It's called positioning. And what you need to do is position your organization to be at the top of a list. It may be an imaginary list, but if it's the donor, and that's the donor holding the checklist there in the upper right-hand corner, you need to be at the top uh, of his list. And the point of the positioning technique is that you can create your own list where you're number one, not by cheating, but taking advantage of a human condition to be top of mind. Uh, Donors choose the top of their maybe perceived list, and second place is hard to recall. Um, the So you want to know, well, how do I get to the top of the list? Well, your marketing and message has to create your own relevant list, relevant to the donors, where you're the best. So you might limit that list to say we are number one in Houston, for example, at what we do. Um, you don't necessarily have to list who number two is. I don't actually mean you publish a list, but the list criteria have to be relevant to your donor targets, and it has to resonate with what they are expecting. Let me give you an example. You could say we're the only service providing. These could be your stem sentences. We're recognized as the leader in those providing. This might be in your promotional material. Winners of the award for, again, implying that there was a competition and you came out first. The most trusted provider, offering a new and different approach. Fastest growing, again, fastest growing or unique. And these are marketing techniques, and they take advantage of the fact that human beings can only remember the first category. The book that I recall that produced this uh, asked, do you remember who the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean? Of course, that dates me, but, um, and the answer is Charles Lindbergh. And does anybody know who was second? If we had a better interactive format here, I'd ask the room, who was the second person to fly solo across the Atlantic? And a history fact little worth knowing, it was Amelia Earhart, about 6 years behind Lindbergh. But who was the second man to fly across the Atlantic? Nobody knows, not even the author of the book. So it's taking advantage of, you've got to be on the top of a particular category. Number three, aim to retain. Returning donors, you remember my diagram with the red oval that moved. Returning donors, repeat business, translates to stability, growth, and savings. You've worked hard to get these folks. You've got to have strategies and mechanisms in your fundraising thinking, in your fundraising strategy to keep them. Sustaining means retaining. Repeat business is the key. Don't let the horse out of the barn. Once you've corralled the horse, you've got to keep them happy. Uh, in a survey that was done a number of years ago, donors said they don't repeat their gifts. Why didn't they repeat a gift? They surveyed folks who had stopped giving. And the reason they gave were 18% of them said that they received poor service or poor communication. 13% they'd never been thanked. 9% had no memory of supporting. Um, 8% said, well, I had no information on how the gifts were used and that they felt they were unneeded, said 5%. Now, several of these points require somebody to do some work on the inside of a nonprofit to make these things happen. Donors need to feel needed and cared for. That's the bottom line. So here's how you pull in somebody from basically if you look at the stair step here, they're ignorant of the need, ignorant of what perhaps the nonprofit can do for the community or in fact make them happy. And you start with many folks and you work toward the individual donor. And these stair steps are very interesting. The first step is awareness. They have to be aware of the need. Again, this is a marketing we're talking about, making them aware. This is not different from general for-profit marketing. If they have awareness, if it's done correctly, it generates some interest. That's the next step up. They then develop some empathy for the situation, which provides motivation. And all the way on that blue arrow on the left, we're narrowing the field from lots of folks, narrowing it down to an individual. If they can experience what it is you do, it sharpens and increases their dedication. And if they can actually participate in some way, shape, or form, that even further advances the cause. And with that, you build trust that what you do is what they would do if they had the time and the talent that you have. And what you're doing is building in a partner. And the point I want to make here is it starts with the message that you put out there that builds awareness. So how do you sustain a relationship? You build them along this line and to hold on to the donors that you have. I want to take just a minute to explain the dynamics of how the human mind works. It turns out that in general, and I haven't had this model fail in 35, 40 years, there are two dimensions to commitment. Questions that the consumer, that the donor in this case, judges you. And the first question is, does the relationship or potential relationship have value to me? And what does value mean? Value is the perceived benefit relative to the cost. So it's not a mathematical relationship. It's like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Am I motivated by the need and urgency? Your message has to convey that. I'm putting this out there as hints as to what you have to include in your uh, marketing effort. Do I have the means? Is what they're asking for something I can afford? Do I have the opportunity? Are they in my neighborhood? Is another way to look. Are they within my reach? If you are if you're appealing for the Cincinnati YMCA in the Houston market, it ain't going to work. Of course, it's obvious. But the opportunity is within the range of influence and timing and location. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, that's a judgment of what your value added is, that red box we started with. Now, the second question is, do they care about me? This is kind of a un, unmentioned, but do we share values that are important to me? Can I relate to this group? And this is again the donor asking, do they appreciate and need me? Go back to that survey we just covered. That 5% didn't feel needed. So the adage at the bottom is picked up the literature, of course, is very true. People don't give because you have needs, and that's not the nature. They give because you meet needs. And so you've got to make it clear in your promotional material that you meet a need. Now, we can put these two questions into a graph to describe relationships. If we simplify the answer is to yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down. First question in yellow, do they offer value? The green question is, do they care about me? And it turns out there's a whole cycle here. You start with, they don't know anything about you, and they're not, if you will, they're not donating to you. Or in the profit world, they're not buying from you. And that's the none category, a very stable category, no relationship. Then they hear about you. That awareness moves in. And they say they care about me. They're talking to me. Maybe I'll consider a donation to them. Maybe I'll do business. And then there's this action line that I show as a dashed line here. And you trace along there, and they cross the line. They say, the answer to the question now is, do they offer value? It's now yes. So you take a yes for care and a yes for benefit and value, and they're proud and enjoy the choice that they've made of you. They're proud. I'm a proud donor to X. And now here's the thing. How do we keep them in that box? That's the sustaining relationship that we're aiming for. Well, it can turn left or right here. If suddenly, going back to that survey, if the signal they're getting is, they don't care about me, you fall into this box. I regret being a donor to that group. I regret my choice of them. I'll turn my attention elsewhere. You don't want to be there. Unstable state, it's headed toward no relationship whatsoever. On the other hand, if they turn right, they say, you know what? I'm absolutely certain that they care about me. And that's that ladder. You go up that ladder, and the more experience they have with you, the more certain they are they made the right choice. And that translates into trust. And that green box in the upper right is where you want to land. And that's the folks that you retain. And so this lovely little colorful diagram is a very simple way to describe what's the message we're putting out there. And that goes back to my original comment about how much effort this takes. It isn't simply soliciting a donation, it's maintaining the care factor. And how that's where I get the term donor care from. So what's this person doing? Um, who do they work for? I don't think anybody in the room likely speaks Korean or reads Korean. That happens to be Korean. But she's working for the Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army is a brand, and it communicates trust. Whatever your experience, it brings to mind whatever your experience, positive or negative, hopefully positive. You understand who she's collecting for, what she's asking for, all by the shape of something you can't even read. That's a really good brand. And a brand says a lot. Here's another brand. Amongst hospitals, we're not talking about those nonprofits today, but University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. This is a legendary brand because it communicates what we do. It's stronger. It says we're trying to make cancer history. And it has a wonderful double meaning that not only are they making history in terms of forging their way through new treatments, but they want to make it past tense, which identifies with most of the public. That's a brand. I'm not suggesting you get an artist, but I think your symbol has to recognize that in the human reaction, I know who you are. The badge you wear, I recognize that. Just quickly, and I don't want to belabor this, here are some well-known nonprofit brands. Um, Drop down there to youth organizations. Why do you think Girl Scouts of the USA is on top and the Boy Scouts aren't even mentioned? One easy separation is the Boy Scouts don't sell cookies. There's a marketing effort behind the Girl Scouts annually that identifies them with photographs on the box and so forth. And people say, what do you think of the youth organization? Well, they think of the Girl Scouts. Um, Take any of these other. American Red Cross, of course, is on the top, but Habitat for Humanity gets Salvation Army that we just saw the picture in the upper, I'm in the upper left corner, and so forth. You can look at this list and see if you necessarily agree with the sequence but these are nonprofit brands that people already know the story as soon as they see. This is what comes to their mind. Fourth fundamental. Fundraising takes a process. So it talked about a lot of strategic thinking about, well, you got to retain people and you've got to compete. Well, it isn't going to happen by accident. And it requires consistent donor interactions, both initial interactions and continuing sustaining interactions. And you need a process to do that because unless you're super trained and you're doing all the work, the different folks that they're going to rub up against have to have a consistent approach to donors. Being consistent is tough. And I learned this, I got this slide many, many years ago. Do you know
Hello.
any infallible people? Why is it resisted to have a check?
Hi, good. How are you doing?
Please mute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, the
Okay.
A process checklist is frequently resisted, but in effect, a process checklist describes the process that you want to follow in sequence with priority. And so I'm recommending it strongly that you simple documentation of process can be
Oh, that's
just the
awesome.
checklist. Okay, I break the process of fundraising into three departments, if you will, three phases, three P's. The first phase is prospecting, identifying and targeting the best match of prospective donors through your marketing message. Can you afford to talk to everybody out there? This objective of this stage is to narrow the field. That's a little funnel filter there, between the two boxes that funnels it down and separates out the folks that can identify with what you do and improve the odds that your message will result in a donation. In other words, separate the wheat from the chaff. The third phase, we'll talk about each of these in just a minute. The second one is the persuasion module. How do you motivate prospects to donate? Now, if you're talking to a large audience, you're going to have to motivate them with a message. If you're talking about individuals one-on-one, there's a different approach. We're going to talk about both of those in just a second. And number three, once you've got them, how do you hold on to them? You can't hold on to all of them. That's not very likely at all, unless they're in two or three individuals. But how do you sustain and develop successful donor relationships? And that's a third set of skills. So if you're asking one person to do all of this, which is quite possible if you're small, it requires a fair amount of training. If you're talking about three different departments, the effort begins to build. So, okay, first one, prospecting for donors. Going back to the category, remember with the individuals, donors you go and find or donors that find you. To find donors, you've got to do a lot of research and rank them and develop a measure of what their resources are, how rich are they, what their motivation might be, what common objectives do you have, what group have you shared values, and what I mean by that is do you just open the doors to the public, or do you invite people at a certain trade fair or some other kind of filtering group to learn more about what you do? And do they have the opportunity? Are they part of the community? Do they have the same, some objectives that are obviously the same? Will they reach out to you and you can reach out to them? And then tracking the history of why people have in the past decided to support your program. Learn from the victories that you've had. What's going on? Why are they deciding to contribute? What do they find? What common ground? And build on that. Analyze that and build on that. Also, you can build on why they rejected. What didn't they understand about the message? So you got to have some focus on that. The second part is have an awareness message out there through whatever means you can reach of what you do. So you aim to be their agent for good. Do you share helping the homeless, bringing pets off the street, or finding pets from strays and so forth, or whatever your thing is? And you match your media as well as the message to the target audience. Uh, Awareness messaging, a simple checklist for that is to develop empathy. You remember that's one of the stair steps. Promoting empathy, interest, and motivation. The components of your message, and again, a checklist to a certain degree of information and education, understanding the difficulty, where maybe people don't appreciate what value you do bring to the table. What's your promise? What kind of results do you promise? What are their expectations? Uh, Managing their expectations as well. The urgency. Why should they act now? Remember that pinwheel of all the opportunities there are. So why should they put you at the top of the list now? And that usually leads to pointing out the consequences of inaction. Um, and also an appeal for action. We need your donations now. The Los Angeles fires come to mind, an immediate example. The Red Cross needs your support right now. The basic message behind all of this is we want your support to be your agency for this cause, but we need action now. If you don't take action now, they'll move on to the next case. Media. How do you get your message out? It's age dependent. At least that's the point of this slide. The boomers, baby boomers, born between 44 and 1944 and 1964, strongly lean on email. That's decreasing, by the way. The Gen Xers strongly lean on social media, and the millennials, 1980 to 1994 birth, are even stronger on social media. You can see the sequencing there if you read this graph. Direct mail just falls off completely, a waste of time. And yet the older um, nonprofits that I observe in the Houston area waste a lot of time and effort on direct mail. Now, maybe they don't completely waste it because who's got the money? The folks with the money to donate are in the boomers category. So this is just food for thought in terms of how you put your campaign out there. Do you do the ones most comfortable for you or the most economic, or do you do one that reaches people? Number two, second part of that prospect. Move from prospecting. Let's suppose we've developed some good prospects. How do we convert them to donate? Well, you've got to have a good case for support. It's got to speak to the urgency of task, reliability, uh, specific results that you've achieved. If Here it breaks in two, and I have another diagram coming up on this. If you're dealing with individuals, you've got to build relationships. Uh, Stepwise toward that trust box that we talked about with the map, with the green box. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of follow-up, implying a lot of time. Uh, in a second, I'll show you the ask, a factual and prepared and sincere ask, but it requires one-on-one. Organizations, this is where folks take the simple route is will ask for a grant. That requires a formal process. It's going to have to be written, and it's going to be judged on its merit, and you won't be in the room when it's being judged. You've got to build relationships so that perhaps your request goes to the top of their pile, that they recognize you, or you get an invitation, and it's appropriate to what they provide money for. And in this one, the advice in the literature, and very clearly, is being persistent. Don't expect first-time success, but be persistent. Let's talk about the individual side. Okay. Individual relationships require at least 3 rounds of contact. One, to build a network, finding mutual interests amongst the community, who knows who, listening, learning, and networking. Then you develop a contact, get to somebody you get to tell your story and transform your passion and your passion transformed into participation. And you bridge a story of mutual interest. You're building them up that staircase again that we talked about. And the third is where you actually close the deal, close the sale if you were a salesman, and you are a salesman for your organization, a sincere and rehearsed invitation to join a cause. And you need to anticipate that the answer initially will be no, and that part of your training is to turn no into yes, and that you've got to close the sale. One of the biggest weaknesses in any sales pitch is make an immediate contribution happen. Don't leave it to chance or further thought. Here is a scripted ask from a book called The Generosity Network, and I think it's pretty good. I've added one point in the front of theirs. The first is the hook. This is how, when you're confronted with somebody and you're in the asking moment, this is a rehearsed, scripted prep. You've got to be prepared as much as you would to put on the school play. The first is the hook, intended to get attention with a relevant statement. You draw attention with a surprising fact about the need. Did you know that there are some fact, not made up, but that resonates with who you're speaking to? The second step is to describe your passion. What drew you to the cause? Again, we're one-on-one here. What drew you to the cause and ignited your involvement? Your story, the experience that ignited your passion and opened your eyes. How they can help is the next step. What difference their unique contribution could make. Why you need them as partners to further this mission. What relevance do they have? We need you. And the urgency. What might happen without immediate action? It might range from this will just continue to be on the back burner, or what compelling stories of how individual lives have been transformed, or what could potential be. And then a closing, an invitation to join you and contribute today. Maybe not necessarily join your organization, but to become a supporter. You specify what you need, how much you need, and otherwise what they can do right now, today. And then the sixth step, be silent. Wait for a response. And this turns out to be the hardest part of the script. Now, if you're hearing a no, if you're successful, congratulations. But if you're sensing or the body language says not buying it, first you identify blocking issues that you can remove the blocking. Question, do you like what we do? Question, do you need more information? Both of these are motive. What's the right amount for you? Do they have the means? Maybe you change the amount. Is there some other contribution you could make? Well, time, effort, what are you looking for? Is the timing an issue for you? I can't afford it right now, but I will commit to something later on, or whatever the situation, the opportunity. And then, based on what you hear to the answer to these questions, you adjust your approach. Okay, maybe it's not the amount, or maybe I left some information out, whatever. You address that. So you have to be prepared for the answers to these questions. If you still have no success, and nobody, that little diagram in the corner is a baseball player swinging, nobody bats 1,000. In fact, 25% success rate is probably realistic. That means you've got to talk to 3 people that you waste your time with to get one that donates. You thank them and position them to continue the relationship. Ideally, get a referral. If not you, do you know anybody? Is there someone else you could recommend? And then when this is all done, you've got to document the reasons for rejection because the team that did the filtering, that did the prospecting, must have missed something. And can they learn from your experience? Now, getting back to organizations. On the left-hand side, here's the flow, here's a flow plan of what happens. You got individuals. What I just said was one-on-one. And you follow that yellow down, they go emotional stories, what we just said, and the ask. And then that red bar going across is how you stack up against the competition. What are the alternatives for their donation? This leads to a personal reaction, which leads to a decision. The process on the organizational side, that is foundations, this is where you put in a grant, corporations and foundations. You prepare an application, you make your case for support, which is related to the ask. And then again, you compete. And I showed that with that orange. Amongst pieces of paper, where does your application rank? It goes through a formal evaluation process. You're not in the room. And we've shifted from emotional to purely factual. Whole different way. And remember, this is a minority of what's out there in terms of money. That's a very busy slide. I apologize, but these are tips for writing a grant proposal. Um, don't start by thinking one size fits all. You write one grant proposal that fits all situations. You may have a standard boilerplate, but each one of them has to be customized. It's okay to include a brochure and so forth, but the personal touch is essential. Sign it, make notes on it, or adapt it. Adapt it. If they feel like it's just a Xerox copy being handed out, it's going to have very little effect. You approach from the donor's perspective, of course. What do they want out of the relationship? What do you sense is their mission? Who are they trying to please? What community are they appealing to? How might you help them achieve their goals? Make it worth reading. Uh, do you have facts and figures that support what you claim that you can accomplish? Um, Establish credibility with results, the urgency, and the more stories and pictures, the more perhaps it fits. Maybe your brochure fits this. Make it easy to read, build some excitement. Focus next on the mutual issue alignment. What common elements do you have? Point it out to them if need be. What contact in advance, if you can, same kind of thing, if you can meet with them in advance before you submit your application. And this is where the persistence comes in. You're going to have to put yourself in front over and over. And how adaptable, if they suggest a partnership that maybe compromises or requires a blending of your efforts, how adaptable are you to that? And then to articulate how what you are asking for in this particular case fits your long-term plan. How are you going to support it? If you're building something, how you're going to maintain it, and if you're expanding your scope, what you're going to have in the long term, so that the money isn't going to just be a one shot and one and done. And be prepared to answer quickly any follow-up questions that come. Third, third part of the process, if you look over on the right-hand side. Okay, so if we sorted out prospecting and we convinced someone to become a donor, how do we keep them as a donor? Going back to that diagram again, around and around. Well, you have to have the capacity within the organization to promptly thank on receipt of a gift. And that turns out to be one of the biggest, as you saw, the letdowns that people observe. You've got to have got to have that responsibility. That's why I show it as a separate step. Uh, you apply donor care to build that trust, regular communication, appreciation, uh, recognition, awards, uh, some kind of organized participation as appropriate within your operations, something to involve the donors, that they are now a part of the team. And third, uh, if you get any donor feedback, i.e., complaints, the trick here is to turn and say, or solicit that feedback as asking for advice, another way to involve them. And you collect, summarize, and analyze all that feedback. So by asking for advice, you're basically saying, what can we improve? What do you like about what we do? And then if it's a complaint, you've got to have it's got to go to somebody who feels the responsibility to receive, resolve, and reply to the donors right away and record the action. And then put this all into a donor database where you can collect the information and share it within the organization so that the next person who picks up or the phone isn't starting from zero. It sounds like they know the relationship. It's no secret that donor needs different. One way to categorize the donors is long-term contributors or those that have ceased contributing. Another reason for the database. There are folks that contribute annually. How can we maintain them? How can we integrate them into a program? How do you treat new contributors? How do you welcome them, orient them, and involve them? Or what about older and younger in terms of age? What levels of involvement? What's appropriate for each group? Have you differentiated your fulfillment along these lines? These are just hints. So I hope by now you got the picture that this three-step process is fairly deep and involved. Um, but you've got to handle complaints, feedback, and then you've got to make sure that that voice of the donor, that what they're saying in their complaints is being politely heard inside the organization. What do we need to change? And have a process that flows that in. That's basically the quality process. Um, Without going into great detail, you can go online and get some free nonprofit or very, very low cost nonprofit databases that are structured to track what's going on with each uh, donor historically. Uh, uh, wouldn't recommend a spreadsheet as a starting point. I would recommend that you get that in the red box, there's a consumer's guide to low-cost donor management systems. And it hasn't changed since 2020, to my knowledge, but it reviews some of the systems that are out there. Some of them are free. Um, as a footnote, too, you've got some ethical requirements. And here, in that terms of that diagram where the different color panels were, if your reputation gets damaged by violation of some kind of ethical requirements, or the perception is, that damage could be irreparable. It could take a very long time to heal. So some of the high points are if there's a gift with restrictions, you're ethically and legally bound to use the funds as directed by the donor. If you're going to link to a foundation, timely reporting is required. That's time. You've got to acknowledge donors in the manner in which they prefer. If they want to be anonymous, they can be anonymous. If they want to be known, you have to have a platform to make them known. You don't hire and pay commission to a fundraising group. And a 501c3, which is a nonprofit that folks can take off their income tax if they donate to, that has restrictions. And the restrictions that fundraising expense has to be separated into programs. That's the process that delivers the goods and fundraising. And administrative overhead can be allocated proportionally. And the reason they do this is that so that a sense of an illegal nonprofit is one that only does fundraising, uh, doesn't deliver for a cause. You must have bylaws. You know that if you've started one up, that specifically focuses on one of the bylaws has to say if you dissolve your nonprofit, that all the assets remain in the nonprofit tax sheltered sector. Just be aware of that. Fifth and final, metrics matter. Numbers are the language of fundraising. A survey done by Charity Navigator when they were building their rating system, and if you haven't been on, you ought to see how you rated and your competition is rated. The number one thing well, first of all, they asked donors rank what they considered effectiveness indicators before they made a donation. So I want to put my money in the right place. How do I read? Well, they speed read, and what they pick up are numerical highlights. First is performance data. What kind of impact do you have? Strategy isn't usually numbers, but strategy can have goals and aim points. So inside your strategy is what your goals are, the numbers. What's the cost per outcome? And these kind of decrease exponentially. What's your measures of your financial stability? How do you measure your reputation, which tends less to be numeric, and policies. So you can see numerical things judged by numbers are pretty high on the list. And that's the point. This is an honest feedback from a large group of donors. Let me wrap up here. Can you measure with numbers? The five fundamentals I've been talking about, I put alongside each in the right-hand column what you might measure. So you want to know what kind of effort are we expending on fundraising? So man hours, percent of the total, what the budget is and results are typical numbers. That's for internal consumption. How are we competing? What's our success rate versus contacts made? Is our appeal working? Um, how many asks do we have? What's our batting average with asking? Are we sustaining support? What's our repeat donor percentage? Clearly, any organization on fundraising should know how many repeat donors we have and how we treating them. What do they say in their surveys? Do we conduct a survey? Are we having consistent operation? Are we learning a learning organization? Are we following up from mistakes we've made or things we could improve? And then last year's measures to improve, just issues identified, improvement actions taken, measures of measures. So metrics matter externally. Your marketing message, is it working? You've got to have numbers in there that easily convert to do a good job of competing. If you have numbers and your competition doesn't, you've got a leg up. If they do and you don't, you're behind. Internally, the team needs to know, is it worth what we're doing effective? Both goals, are we achieving our goals, and how are we doing in performance? And can we articulate the urgency? People served, learning what works and what doesn't work, so forth. I apologize for rattling through this, but I don't want to take all of your day. So this just wrap up here. Fundraising requires full-time effort and full-time attention. If you haven't gotten that picture by now, I've failed. Revenue fuels the mission and expands the outreach. Nonprofits have the burden of two customers, the people who consume what they do and the people who support what they do. And both require a fair amount of effort. The consumers are probably why you form a nonprofit. The supporters keep that mission alive. Competition for funding is difficult. It's as difficult and more difficult because your attention is divided. You've got to be unique to compete. You've got a position to be the first choice in some category. You've got to know who you compete with. It may not, and unlikely it will be a nonprofit that does the same thing you do. It might be a competitor, might be in a whole different category. You've got to sustain your gains, and repeat business has got to have effort behind it and has got to mean something to the organization. It also means keeping your promises. I highly recommend number 4 that you have a process, you have a formal process to improve and sharpen your ability to execute. sports coaches lately have been saying it's the process. Well, they're right. It's the process, and it's a three-part prospecting, persuading, and preserving. Um, and then you've got to demonstrate metrics that describe urgency and priority of results. Externally, most valuable, but internally just as valuable, frankly, to keep you on the track. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions that anybody has.
George, what
Yes,
what if any use you think AI can provide to help with fundraising?
that's a good question. I'm still learning AI. Um, I think AI can, I'm probably underselling AI, but I think you could get a consensus of what's out there to the general questions you have about competition. What comes to mind, what if this is the proposition, what's it likely to, what's kind of the consensus of the marketplace, um, in terms of doing a wide sweep of um, whether the competition is tough or what what's unique about it? What's the uniqueness of your appeal? Um, I think AI could also probably help you uh, take the burden off of replying uh, to difficult situations, at least a draft to speed up your ability to answer um, donor questions and issues. That's just off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think I've tried using it just to find out if it can help or what kind of product can be produced, and I think it can be pretty helpful because I asked for things like develop a fundraising plan,
Yeah.
and it came out with a reasonably good version of what a fundraising plan should be. What I haven't tried is to see if AI can recommend donors, a list of donors that are, I don't know whether you have to give them your field that you're interested in or what. But anyway, I think I agree with
Yeah,
you.
obviously, I think these five fundamentals you can take uh, these points and apply them to an evaluation of a fund or build a fundraising program on it by asking the questions. How well do we comply with all of this? Um, I think it'd give you a sense of structure. And that's why I opened with a comment that we're not fundraisers. But there is no magic pill that I've ever seen that automatically produces money. But I think there's a structure here and I said this for years of looking at what people apply. I did see some of the AI answer, and I thought most of it was okay. Some of it was a little superficial in terms of what would you actually pick up and run with. That's just strictly my opinion. AI keeps getting better by the day, so I could learn.
You have a couple of comments in the chat there. I don't know whether Levy's looking at these, but
I'm not seeing the chat, which is my
Um,
fault.
Click on the chat button on the bottom. I don't know if you can see it, George. Or do you want me to read them for you?
Why don't you read them for the group? Which ones you're
Okay.
talking?
So we got by Lizette. How do you recommend to manage the message in light of all the elimination of DEI initiatives?
Say, restate that. How do I got the last part, but
How
how
do
do you
you
reckon?
recommend to manage the message in light of all the elimination of DEI initiatives?
Well, I don't know what your nonprofit, what your business is. Is there an opportunity there with capacity for DEI being deleted from the government? Is that creating an urgency of need? Is my reaction. Um, is there a gap to be filled that your organization can fill it? Um, And can you appeal to a foundation or individuals who want to see DEI go forward? Is that creating a market opportunity? I don't know if that addresses the question, but I just get a sense when there's a shift in the marketplace, there's an opportunity being created. If somebody is relinquishing, um, that may not be sensitive to all the dimensions of DEI elimination. It's too new to absorb to, but look for trends.
Okay, we have another question by Temi. What type of media is gaining the most growth amongst boomers if the use of email is decreasing?
Well, I think messaging, um, I have to go from personal experience. There are several charities that I'm familiar with that actively use iMessage and like that follow up with direct messaging because it has immediate contact with the individual. So they secure your phone. They do respect your privacy, which I appreciate by asking if you want to stop receiving these messages. But um, one cause in particular comes to mind, but I'm not going to name them. They were very aggressive in terms of stating the case over and how urgent their case was. Um, I I think email is losing ground rapidly because it's flooding with so many unnecessary messages. I think it's less effective. So if you have pictures and stories to tell, perhaps direct mail would reach boomers better. Um, I tended to be negative about direct mail, but obviously, since it continues, it has some kind of ratio of success. So I'd have to do that by observation. Any others?
No. Does anybody in the audience have a question?
I'd just make a comment that um, to find potential foundation sources, I have found the foundation directory to be the best approach. Now that if you want to subscribe to the foundation directory, that costs you, I forget what it is, but a couple of $100 at least, maybe even a couple of hundred for a month. It's fairly expensive, but you could use it, get as much as you can out of a month's use and then discontinue it. But the other thing with that foundation directory is that United Way offers a program where I believe it's once a month, they open their access to foundation directory free to any nonprofit that wants to use it, but they have to go to the United Way office and use it.
I have one general suggestion that comes out of experience that I teach in another seminar, but one of the greatest free sources of information could be your fellow nonprofits who don't see you necessarily see you as competition. Uh, Pay them the compliment of asking them how they do it. And the general term for this is benchmarking, but that kind of throws you off. But I encourage anybody I talked about over the years, um, if you have some kind of national affiliation, find out what the other chapters are doing and encourage pooling of knowledge. Like Bert, Bert's comment prompts me to think that if you simply ask, you say, well, what does S use? Or what does so and so use? Uh, I never meant that you should just sit there alone and try to think about what you do. Say, hey, I need this. What do you do? Um, that's short of hiring experience. You can hire people that have the experience on this, but you can get maybe United Way could even give you some practical tips what's going on out there. But I think the thing is don't try to reinvent the wheel. Get out there and ask questions And the worst you can get is no response, and you might be better off. But highly recommend that when you have a particular problem. And if there are chapters of what you do and others, if you were, I don't know, Habitat for Humanity, what do other chapters do in the rest of the country or something like that? And if it's fundraising is the topic, um, I don't think there's a universal solution, but there's lots of good stuff out there. You just got to know what's effective. Okay. Any others?
Nope.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Appreciate it. And as I asked on the last slide, did you learn anything that good today? And what can we make clearer? I apologize. We've covered a lot of material in a short space of time, but I hope it gave you some food for thought. And if you think we overlooked anything, I very much would appreciate some email correspondence and what we can do to improve in the future. And thank you again.
Also submit a request for assistance form on the Ash website if you want some direct contact with Ash on any subject regarding your operations. Okay.
Well, I'll be sending the recording of this presentation and a copy of the slides after this. So thank you once again and hope to see you on our next webinar.
Thank you.